to our fourth topic of discipline. And I know that there are so many thoughts on this. I'm going to give you a whole bunch on this today. I want you to think on these things, right? Talk about these things and kind of maybe from that, you might have some differing ideas. You might have some new ideas. I love this quote from Ron Morris. Discipline is about teaching children to behave properly, not punishing them for behaving badly. So even from the beginning of this, you're going to see, I believe that discipline is about teaching. It's not about punishment. I always say we should be teaching our kids and not telling our kids. Zig Ziglar, one of my favorite names ever, says, he says, teaching is how to behave, how to live, how to work, how to interact, and how to play properly. Now, even when you look at things online, and I always struggle with whether to post this because I don't know Dr. Dobson. I love Dr. Dobson's books, but someone posted this once, and it says, the way children behave is a reflection of their respect for their parents. And I think we do a surface look at discipline sometimes, because I disagree with this. It is probably more a reflection of their age. It is a reflection of their lack of sleep. Maybe it is low blood sugar. Thinking back to when that kid was punching someone in the face, I'm not saying that, but just a kid freaking out in a car or crying or having a tantrum, the way they're wired, life situations, stress. Do you have a teen? Do you have a high schooler, a middle schooler, when they have an exam, right? They're pretty stressed, or maybe just life challenges, physical, emotional, and other things. Zig Ziglar in his book, Raising Positive Kids in a Negative World, talks about the changes in parenting. In the 1940s, the top offenses in public schools were as follows: running in hallways, chewing gum, wearing improper clothing, making noise, and not putting paper in waste baskets. Wow, times have changed. Like, do we need to look at like weapons and fighting and suicide attempts and disrespect for parents and authority? I do agree with Gordon Neufeld and Gabor Mate in Hold On to Your Kids. A parent is by far a child's best compass point, or another adult, like a teacher or someone who acts as a parent substitute. I always say to my kids, you need other adults who are speaking into your life as well. Mark, and I always say his name wrong, or Stretcher. Sorry, Mark, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry, I always butcher your name. Understanding Your Young Teen says, he talks about this proximity versus affinity. I believe one of the biggest mistakes parents of young teens can make is thinking our primary responsibility is to control the behavior of our kids. It is a spoke on the wheel of parenting, but it is not it. So here's what I want to do. I want to go through a couple of just big things of discipline. Number one, you need a relationship for influence. You need a relationship. So much of what we talked about today is about this idea of a relationship. And two quotes from two books. Wise parents will not impose more restrictions than the attachment power they wield will bear. That's a quote you have to think on for a sec. Number two, your impact on your children's lives is proportional to the depth of the relationship you have fostered with them. I love both of those. Now, this is from that book, It's Just a Phase. Look at these two kind of intersecting lines here. And I think this is profound for us as parents. One is positional influence. When you have a baby, you have 100% positional influence, right? If you're watching this talk in a church or wherever else and you have a kid, you just pick up your kid and leave, right? You just go and do it. That goes down. I don't have a ton of positional influence left with my daughter going away to school and my senior as a son. I mean, I have some, it's my house and these things, but what I have is relational influence. When you have a baby, you have zero relational influence. I'm not talking about close connection and stuff, but that grows. And what you want is good relational influence. It was a couple of years ago, it's New Year's Eve. My son was going to one party, my daughter to another, my wife and I to a third. And I just said to my kids, can we chat for a sec? And they said, sure. First off, having teenagers who will listen and say, sure, to me shows I've had some relational influence. And I talked about, we're a Christian family. I talked about, the things of parties, alcohol, drugs, sex, and those things. And I just talked about our Christian witness. And I think I quickly prayed for them and off we went. But the only reason I could do that is the hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations, the family dinners, the family meetings, the vacations, the listening to conversations, all of those things. I really like this in The Price of Privilege. Our disappointment should be directed at our child's behavior or choices, not at their existence. There's a world of difference between behavior controls. Sorry you did so poorly in your math test. TV's off limits till you pull the grade up. Do you need some help? And psychological controls. Going to be flipping burgers for the rest of your life if you continue to be such a goof off. Your goal is to correct behavior, not to destroy your child. And to use the same author, while both connection and discipline on their own are important parenting factors, what is really predictive of how well kids do is the interaction of those two factors, warm connection with appropriate discipline. It's both of those things, and I really like that. So we've just talked about you need a relationship for influence. Number 2, clear, agreed on expectations and consequences. Karen Gordon has this workbook for Analyze Your Teen, and she talks about 3 types of boundaries. Stone wall, rules are rigid, little flexibility. Parent gives the rules, the kid follows the rules. 2 is wild field boundaries, kind of this, just do whatever you want. I'm at a talk, I can't remember how long ago, a year ago, and a father said to me, I grounded my kid because he came in late for curfew. I have high school kids. Curfew is an interesting conversation. I said, when is his curfew? He said, he doesn't have one. I said, sorry, you grounded him because he was late for his curfew? Yes. Well, when was his curfew? He doesn't have one. I'm like, I'm confused. No wonder the kid was confused, right? Like, come home at a certain time, but I'm not going to tell you what time it should be. Wild field. Rules are unclear and vague. What were to be? Picket fence boundaries, right? Rules are clear, flexible, and negotiated. I think it was the summer of grade 8. My son, it's August, like a perfect August night as we're heading into the new school year. And he said, can I stay out later tonight? And I forget if it was 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, but we're kind of like, okay, I think we said 11 o'clock. And so it's funny, when we said 11, all the other parents said 11. You'll find this kind of happens in life. And so we're at home, and it was 10 o'clock. And so as 10 o'clock rolls around, he's not home. 10 after 10, in comes my son. Now, I don't know what it is with us as adults, but I'm angry. This was the rule. And so as he came in, I went to say something, and he said, I'm late. Let me explain why. I'm kind of like, just let me yell at you quickly. And he said, so we're heading home. We dispersed. He actually said the word dispersed at 10 to 10 or whatever it was. And as they began heading home, it was only him, and then it was a girl that was left. And she said, it's dark. Do you mind walking me home? And my son says to me, I either told her no because I had to be home at 10, or I told her sure, but I knew I was going to be home a little bit later. And he said, I knew you'd be okay with it, so I walked her home. I remember swallowing deeply and thinking, I almost yelled at him for doing the right thing. Talk about how my influence would have waned a little bit if I had yelled at him for being home when I had an arbitrary time of 10 o'clock, and he made a really good decision. If the next day the father of that girl said to me, hey, I heard your son, didn't walk my daughter home for whatever reason, I would have been kind of frustrated. I would have said, Ben, why didn't you, I still believe in chivalry. Walk her home. That's okay. I really like this. And this is, again, where parents need to see the language switches. All good parents erect fences for their children as they grow up. The fences surround their children and protect them. These fences are the values that moms and dads relay to their kids, either by default or by design. Parents do this for the purpose of safety, guidance, and boundaries. This is a 3-slide quote, just to let you know. The fences provide the children from wandering too far off the right path and making poor decisions. The boundaries vary from family to family, but most moms and dads provide these fences for their kids. And here's such an important quote, the last slide here. Some parents fail to realize that it's the job of every child to tear down their parents' fence and build their own. See how important that language is? I want my kids to love Jesus because they love Jesus, not because I love Jesus. I want my kids to come home early or get good sleeps and be rested and healthy because they know it's good for them, not because I want them to do it. I want my kids to get good grades because it gives them opportunities and choices in life. Our goal is our kids make these decisions for themselves. So many of those parenting styles is we still make it for them. It was in the middle of high school years that we stopped having curfews for both of our kids. They would say, what time is my curfew tonight? And we would say, what time do you want to be home tonight? Unbeknownst to them, there was no curfew. Whatever they said, we'd be fine with. Parents often say, well, nothing good comes after midnight. And it's like, do you remember being a teenager? Do you remember just hanging out with your friends? Our kids go to bed later because that's just the way they are. I am an early bird. At 10 o'clock, I'm like, it's time to start heading upstairs. My kids go out at 10 o'clock. The idea that everything that happens after 10, our kids are all they're drinking and having sex, this is fear. If we've talked to our kids about things and they're making good choices, they're making them at midnight, at 2, or at 3 in the morning. Now, I don't want my kids coming home. I think the latest my daughter once said was 2 o'clock, and there was a reason for all of this that was happening. But she came home the next day and said, wow, I'm really tired. I need to maybe come home earlier one day. Again, this is the idea of launching our kids. So we have a relationship, we have agreed on expectations, and then we look at and this should probably be punishment versus training. Ron Morris travels and speaks to teachers, and he says, you have to decide what you're all about. Are you here to give children the punishment and consequences they deserve for failure, or the training and support they need for success? All good discipline has a purpose in it. You know, what we usually do is take away as punishment. Your kid comes home late, we take away their phone for a week. Well, what did that have to do with anything? A week later, we hand back a phone. Have they learned anything? Because there was no teaching in that. If your goal is that at 10 o'clock, your teenager is supposed to just think all of a sudden, I need to be at home. Have we told them how to set, I was going to say, hey, SIRI. If I said that, though, all your phones will beep right now. But, you know, on their phone, iPhone or Android, if you set whatever thing, I need an alarm at this time, then they might remember. Or do they have a watch? Or how will they remember? Are you teaching them how to make these decisions? Or do we just kind of say, taking your phone away, a week later we've given it back? We haven't taught them anything. Chuck Swindoll, in his book Parenting, says there's a difference between childish irresponsibility and willful defiance. I actually like that. Understanding the distinction will be useful in knowing how to interpret the meaning of the behavior and how to respond to it. When accidents happen, patience and tolerance are the order of the day. If the foolishness was particularly pronounced for the age and maturity of the individual, mom or dad might want to have the youngster help with the cleanup or even work to pay for the loss. Otherwise, I think the event should be ignored. I forget where we were one day, but one of my young kids leaned on one of those tables and the table kind of shot up and the glass shattered all over the room. They weren't there to irritate you. They didn't mean to do it. It was a mistake. Now, kids make mistakes, so the kid, my son, I think it was my son, cleaned the mess up with us, but won't do that again most likely. So I want to talk about one of these highly contested conversations I find in the church world, spanking. Now, I have teenagers. I'm not spanking teenagers, so we're talking about younger kids here. And if you look at this chart, it's important. The blue, there's yes and a no. I believe there are good parents who spank and good parents who don't. I do not believe in spanking. Now, I want us to walk through this so that we've thought through it with the decisions that we make. I think there are parents who don't spank, would be my category, who take it too far and don't discipline. I think that's wrong. There are parents who do spank. My wife spanked twice. I have a kind of, you talk about some kids being stubborn sometimes. I have a strong-willed daughter. Twice my wife did that. We're going to explain that as well, but you can spank and go too far the other direction into abuse. Now, first off, everyone who was spanked is not forever damaged. I was spanked. Many of you were spanked. Everyone who wasn't spanked is not spoiled, right? This is extreme thinking. Now, many of you who think on spanking, we all come back to Proverbs 13:24, which says, he who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is careful to discipline him. Now, almost every scholar I read in researching and looking at this does not believe that the rod is a physical rod. There are many times in the Bible it talks about the rod, other times a rod, not the baseball player, a rod, like a physical rod. Anytimes it's a rod, often it's in the Old Testament, right? It's like the Egyptians who beat the Israelites, like beat someone to death with a rod, that's a physical rod. But almost across the board, people believe that this verse is talking about, the rod. So it's a concept, like he who spares discipline hates his son. Well, that really changes things. Children's controls, as a side note, are really fragile at these young stages in life. Fatigue, hunger, and frustration. I forget where I read that, but it's so important. So should you spank your kids? First off, I would say do these. My answer is actually no. I mean, statistics today show that statistically it might change something in the moment, but in the long run it doesn't help. Child psychologists and many others say it's not helping. And so if it doesn't help in that realm, and if the Bible's not telling us to do that, there are other ways to deal with discipline. One, spend time with your kids. What does it mean when we have no relationship and then we strike a kid? Create a warm and loving home with unconditional love. And unconditional love means I love you forever and always. Sounds like a book by an author named Robert Munch, which it probably is, but it doesn't mean we don't talk and discipline. And there's many ways to discipline, timeouts, natural consequences, and many things. I have a huge chapter of this in the book that I talked about, my new book. Set clear and concise boundaries together as a family, and then the consequences for breaking those boundaries. Do life with your kids, not for your kids, teaching them how to do all things. If they do something wrong, teach them how to do it right. And I always love, like, if you give your kid a timeout, we used to say to our kids, my wife and I, come back when you're ready. It's not here's 3 minutes. It's when you're ready to have a conversation, come back. And discipline the behavior, don't break the child. Now, I know I've just said a lot very quickly. I just want you to think through things. We want success. Our goal is success with our kids. Now, coming back to spanking, the research says something which is interesting. The research says that whether a child gets a punitive spanking or not is hardly ever determined by the child's behavior. It is almost always determined by how the adult's day went. And that's why children don't get spankings at 8 in the morning. They get them at 8 at night. When an adult who is tired, frustrated, and exasperated from the day starts to hit a child, it should not be about the adult, it should be about the kid. And so I just want you to think through these conversations. And he says one other line which is interesting. He says, you're not a parent till your kids reach around 18 months of age. It's this switch that when your kids are below that, right, you basically serve them. When they need to be changed, when they need to be fed, when they need things, we come. But at a certain age, we have to flip this, that the world does not revolve around your kid. And he actually talks about, you'll see kids who've never had that flip. They're 15 years old and the world still kind of completely revolves around them. And he does say strong-willed kids take a little bit longer for those things, but it does change. So again, of the 4 things we're talking about, this is one of these things that I'm going to encourage you to read some books and to go deeper into because there's so much here. I just want you to be well versed in this conversation of discipline, right? Because we want success in it. So it's about teaching, not telling. And everything we do, I always think, am I teaching my kid? Am I teaching my kid? I actually did 500 days on Twitter teaching my kid one thing every day. This was many years ago when they were young. Like, I want to teach them how to do things, but teaching them how to behave properly, teaching them how to talk to adults, teaching them how to get along as brother and sister. Influence matters. All the things that we do, the better your influence, the less you will have to discipline. Picket fence boundaries. I really like that again, right? The idea of like negotiated and talked about boundaries. And everything is about punishment versus teaching. I want it to be teaching. And that's one of the biggest concepts here, right? Teaching versus telling. Now, these are all new books for you. Secrets of Discipline, Ron Morrish. Allison Schaefer has a number of books. This is one of my favorite. Parent on Purpose probably is one of my favorite on this by Amy Carney. Boundaries with Kids by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Anything those two do are also amazing. And then Grace-Based Discipline as well. Think through the concept of discipline. So much to read and so much to think and go through here on this concept and the constructs of discipline.